Okay. Just get my stream key in for all the public to see. Just kidding. All right, it's live. Let me know when you're ready to record. All right, 3, 2, 1, record. Hello, check, testing 1, 2, 3, testing 1, 2, 3. Pretty freaking good, if you ask me. Heck yeah. Uh-oh.
But then you dive into it. Manages to exceed the expectations of an already hilarious premise, with some of the most irresistible exploration, sim management, and mini-games I've seen in a long time. That kept me completely glued to my seat for far more hours than I'd ever intended. With characters and a story packed into it than I could have anticipated.
Okay, that should be good then.
You just routed the audio into your output.
What do you mean? No, yeah, it's just my desktop out. It's just my desktop audio.
I see.
Yeah.
I'm a little quiet and you're a little hot, I think, in the stream.
Okay. I'll put the gain down a bit. And then I'll bring your... I'll just make sure that you're fully... Talk again?
Test.
Should be okay. Let me get a little bit more gain on you. All right. Try that.
I think it sounds good.
Okay. Okay, Devin, let me know if the audio is like messed up still. All right, you ready?
I've been recording. I've been ready, man.
Okay. You bring us in.
Yeah. We're 124, 5. Okay.
Wait. When the hell did I stop recording? I didn't stop recording. Let's start recording over again. Sorry.
Count it down.
Yeah, 3, 2, 1, record.
There we go. That's me. It's me being recorded. All right. I'm gonna bring up your little stream over here so I can see it. Are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled episode of Bad End Podcast, a podcast about video games. I am your host, Kyle Cooksdale, joined, as always, by Joshua Calixto himself, once the most notable Hearthstone journalist, then the most notable K-pop journalist, and now the most notable co-host of Bad End Podcast. How you doing, Josh?
Pretty good. How are you?
How does it feel to have your Hearthstone days behind you? You like look back on that like an old relationship. You're like, man, that sure was a time.
Huh? I mean, it's like interesting to look back on and be like, dang, it was like wild that I was in that world. I feel like I met a lot of cool people through it. It's just one of those things where it's like, how do you stick with a game for so long? You know, like there's so many people who they spend like 7 or 8 years playing like League of Legends, and then they're like just burnt out on the end. And like, I actually played Hearthstone and watched Hearthstone every day for like 5 or 6 years. So, I didn't burn out. I was just like, kind of reached a lull in my reporting on it, and then I was just like, you know what? Let's just chill out on the game. And now I like still enjoy it. I still play it from time to time, but it's not like something that I'm like playing every single day of my life.
Yeah.
But not every game has to be that. And I feel like if you've done it for 5 years, that's what else can anybody ask of you? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I guess when you quit before they did Battlegrounds, right?
No. I played quite a bit of Battlegrounds, but I wasn't like reporting on it as much.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The auto battler stuff.
Some Josh lore for all you recent new Bad-In listeners, if you're out there. And today we have an episode of talking about games and talking about games, as we typically do on this podcast. Starting with, I don't know, where do you want to start? You want to talk about Dave?
We could talk about Dave. I actually had a question that I wanted to ask for later in the show as well that I've been thinking about.
You want to seed it here?
It's a pretty heavy like non-gaming specific question, but it's like we can talk about it later, but it's like,
it's about rock climbing.
Does gaming need a critical apparatus? Does like any form of media need a critical apparatus, like a robust one?
Like an institutional thing?
No, just like a scene of crit. A thriving scene of criticism.
We could talk about that later.
Yeah.
But I'll put that on the list.
Yeah, put it on the list.
Do games need a critical infrastructure?
But we got... Okay, so the games that we will probably be talking about today, I don't know if we'll get to all of them, but we got Halls of Torment. We got Dave the Diver.
Bam, bam.
We got Wild Frost, Fantasy Life,
bam,
and Exo Primal.
Bam, bam, bam.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about Diablo 4.
And Diablo 4, which is the last episode. But
I'll talk about what people are talking about Diablo 4. But
okay.
Let's start with Dave. Josh, tell us about what Dave the Diver is, who he is, the man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah.
What's going on?
So Dave the Diver is an underwater farming game where you farm and explore the depths of the ocean, which changes every day in a very roguelike, procedurally generated fashion. And you bring back your haul to a sushi restaurant that you are trying to run, which then operates as sort of like an overcooked / cook serve delicious restaurant simulator. And then there's a bunch of other like kind of collection mini games.
Ding, ding, ding. I'm going to sound the loop bell. Sounds like we got ourselves a little game.
It's a gameplay loop for sure.
We got a gameplay loop happening.
It's loops on loops with mini games. It feels like a mini game, or it feels like if a phone game turned into, a sentient life form and became like an actual video game that didn't like rely on microtransactions, basically.
They're like, what if we charged money for the game up front? What could that do? What could we do with that? Yeah.
What if we made a phone game not on the phone?
What if we took a mobile game and put it on some other platform with a bigger screen? What could we do there?
But there's a lot of really interesting I guess
Also,
results.
we're saying the reason we're talking about this too is that this game is tearing up Steam. It's got like 60,000 very positive reviews. It's like I think I saw it like outsold Fortnite for like a week or something.
It was definitely the sleeper hit, flavor of the month, Steam chart topper, and I think it's one of those games that just like surprises you with how the way I've described this is that it's like a cozy game for dudes, where the vibe is very like laid back, kind of got like a masculinity to it. Not that you have to be a dude to like get it or have fun with it, but it's got that like, you know, kind of darker theming. It's not as like twee as a lot of other cozy games. It should be noted that this is from, I forgot what the studio is called, but it's basically
we can talk about that in a second. But
yeah. But yeah, I was really enjoying it. I'm really liking the loops and whatnot.
I was gonna say too, another notable thing about this is that it's got this sort of like pixel art indie game style.
Yes, but
it looks sort of like not shit. It's not bad indie pixel art or whatever, but it's like it's got like a mobile game pixel art vibe.
It reminds you of like a Bit Trip Runner, like all the Bit Trip kind of games, and then maybe like Sword and Sorcery EP, Super Brothers.
But not that artistic. I think more like Tiny Tower or like some of like the mobile.
I think it's like it's a brow higher than that. Than Tiny Tower.
Not like Sword and Sorcery. Not even close to that.
Okay, maybe not.
It's like every frame is a painting in that game.
There's something about the style that works for me. I don't know what it is. I think
it feels very gamey, I think, is what's really appealing about it. It doesn't feel like it's trying to not be a game.
Yeah, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, and not in like a postmodern sense. It's just like really laid back. It feels like you're on an island working on it at a sushi restaurant, and that's like what it's trying to evoke, and it does it really well. So I think like that's the cozy space it's trying to put you into, and I think it succeeds at that. Also, I think like there's a coolness about it that a lot of other games don't have, like especially in the indie world. To me, a lot of the like indie pixel art stuff, it doesn't really like connect with me. It doesn't really feel cool, but this game feels cool at times. There's some games where it's like there's some moments where it's doing too much, and I'm just like I don't really know about what's happening here. But other times I'm like, this is sick. Like this is really really dope. Particularly with the sushi restaurant stuff.
I saw some like video of it where it looked like you were like cutting up fish, like Cooking Mama style.
Yeah.
Which looked pretty fun.
Yeah.
So the buried lead for this game that you sort of alluded to that I maybe cut you off too abruptly for is that this is actually not an indie game. So this is Dave the Diver is a really interesting thing because it is a game that is actually by Nexon. Nexon, if you don't know, Josh or dear listeners, is a like giant Korean games company. It's sort of like Korean Blizzard, and they like make huge video games. Notably, like they were one of the sort of pioneers of a lot of the kind of insane cash shop stuff on mobile.
MapleStory, by the way. MapleStory is the game.
Yeah, I mean, MapleStory is like one of them, but they do a lot of, I think they do like Lineage now, and they do like a lot of other sort of giant, I mean, like they kind of like made Korean MMOs as a genre be a thing.
Right.
And so they're very good at designing kind of like compulsive loops and monetizing them. And Dave the Diver is a project by an internal division of Nexon that's called like, I was just looking at it.
Something Rocket or something like that.
Mint Rocket. So they're like it's just Nexon. So this is effectively a AAA video game disguised as an indie game, which I think is really interesting because it's like I mean, I'm going to say this and someone's going to tell me I'm wrong, but I'm trying to think, and I'm like, I don't think there's another instance of like Activision or Ubisoft or like any large American games publisher like making what looks like an indie game. Like all the games you mentioned were like small indie stuff.
The one that comes to mind for me, and it's not really a direct parallel, is Riot with the Riot Forge stuff. And like
yeah, that's a good parallel.
They had the Battle Chasers Night War game that made their turn-based RPG for them. They had like a rhythm game with one of the characters in one of their games. It like has notes of that, even though it's not really a one-to-one. I brought up the website of Mint Rocket here because it's really interesting to me what this site like says. So they're about Mint Rocket.
Just some guys making games.
Our relentless focus is on the enjoyment of the gameplay. There are hundreds of things to consider when creating a game. However, the single most important thing is the fun. We boldly put aside old conventions once considered the standards of success and decided to stick tenaciously to focusing on the fun of a game. We believe the answer lies within the heart of the gamers who just enjoy games. What is the essence of fun that gamers are really looking for? We are constantly asking questions, exploring, and searching for the right answers. So we will do all we can to provide an immersive experience into a game that is really worth playing. Yeah. And their answer was to make a cozy game where you play as a diver named Dave with lots of kind of fat phobia in it.
Yeah, the fat phobia thing is a whole different discussion.
There's stuff going on with that, yeah.
There's stuff going on there. But yeah, so like this is a AAA video game. And it's funny because we talked about, I don't know if we talked about this on the podcast, we've definitely talked about it on the Discord with this thing with like shit aesthetics. Thinking of like Slay the Spire, Vampire Survivors. There was another one. But basically games that like look bad. But there's like my sort of theory is that there's something that is unpretentious about a game that looks bad, that has a way of feeling earnest in a way where a lot of the way games are marketed are trying to manufacture earnesty, such that if your game looks like shit, it's like, it's hard to say that that game is not being earnest. Like no one purposely makes their game look bad until now, maybe. But like it's a sort of thing where like there's something about like Nexon is smart to say that like we can make a game that looks like this, that like is not like the aesthetic is also not uniform, right? Like there's a way to do a pixel art game that, I mean, speaking from literal experience, where like there's sort of all the pixels are the same size and stuff, but like you look at screenshots of like Dave the Diver, and it's like, oh, like the bloom levels are too high in certain areas. Like they're able to manufacture this like feeling of sort of amateurness in certain ways that makes the game, I think, feel approachable, and then it belies the underlying depth, aka budget, that this game actually has behind it, and so it feels sort of like a deal and like a almost like a game that you want to tell people by word of mouth, because you're like, yo, there's this indie game where like eventually you end up in like a mermaid castle at the bottom of the ocean to like do this stuff. Like you wouldn't believe it, you know, just looking at it. And I think there's like something there that they've like really kind of latched onto as a compelling way to attract people to this game, which I think is interesting, right? It's like this, Dave the Diver really represents AAA sort of acknowledging indie in a specific way. I mean, it's very similar, I think, into like what sort of pushed Ubisoft to make something like Life is Strange, which is, you know, sort of non-traditional AAA style video game. I think it's a similar impulse here where it's like, oh, there's like stuff going on. People keep buying pixel arty kind of jank looking video games because the gameplay is good. So they can say like, well, we'll spend more money on developing more content and kind of amortize that through like lower aesthetic fidelity as a way to, you know, make people interested in our game. Because like if Nexon starts like an R&D studio and they put out a game that like looks Nexon level quality, people are going to like call their bluff immediately and be like,
so
that's not a thing.
a couple of things. first off,
Yeah.
it connects with our conversation that we were having last episode about like what if EA made BattleBit?
Yeah.
Like could EA ever make BattleBit?
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I think that like they could, like, under this model that Nexon's doing with this sort of internal studio that makes a game that looks kind of like ass, like EA could totally make BattleBit like this.
Okay, but I also want to ask, it's a decision, right? And for all that we're talking about here, where they might be trying to like ape this low budget earnestness, aren't they also just like straight kind of saving money by making that decision to make the game
Oh, totally.
look like? So if we've talked for a long time about like this model of like focusing on the graphics and like putting so much time into the development of, you know, XYZ is not sustainable because it's like way too expensive to have these people working on these kind of assets, et cetera, et cetera. Does this signal that like change of like we're going to prioritize going toward a, you know, gameplay focused design approach as opposed to like worrying at all about the graphics? Because the site says we want the game to be fun, and you know everything else is kind of second fiddle, right?
I don't think it's totally mutually exclusive, because I'm looking at a video. I don't know if you got something up. I guess you can sort of see it a little bit in your video. I'm just watching a video also on my own screen. Like, there's this fish that is like a 3D animation rigged fish.
Mm-hmm.
And it is like a totally different style than Dave, who is like flat 2D pixel art.
Right.
And like that disconnect doesn't really make sense, because you're sort of saying like, well, not you, the game is saying, okay, we're spending time and money to do 3D assets for fish that look incongruous with like the key art and the main character. And then even like the backgrounds and stuff are their own different aesthetic. They're like kind of blocky pixel art textured 3D model stuff, which is like weird. So I think that like you can, but I think the other thing is that like you can have both. Like you could do a really pretty video game that has like kind of, it prioritizes fun. Like I think that's like possible. I think that it's I don't know. I think it's just a matter of actually wanting to do that as like a first principle thing. I don't necessarily think that it's a either or with like the fidelity of the game. Like it does, like if you imagine that like photoreal AAA video game costs 100% of money, it's not like saying we want to focus on gameplay and now the game costs 50% money.
Right.
It's like maybe it's like 95% or something, because you have to like hire designers and whatever, play test. But like people already do that anyways. Like I don't think someone like, I don't know, Naughty Dog thinks they're putting out an unfun video game, even though their games are like not as like gamey as like Dave the Diver or whatever.
It does feel like a downsizing of the single player RPG experience from the AAA angle, which I kind of appreciate. And for what it's worth, like I think the game works. Like I think a lot of the parts just click. Although if you are irked by mobile game aesthetics and incentive systems, this one might not be it might not be the one that you're going to enjoy very much.
Yeah, it's like a single player RPG that sort of works through intertwined mobile gamey type game loop stuff.
And that's been a big theme that I've been seeing with a lot of the games that I've been playing, where it's like, oh, the loop is so great. And it's like, I feel like we're entering a very loop-oriented era right now, which, I mean, when haven't we been? When haven't we been? But at the same time, like, I feel like there's going to be a backlash against that at some point because, bro, the loop, I'm kind of getting exhausted of the loop, even though I have historically loved the loop, you know?
I think that was the discussion on the Discord as well, as about this game, was that like the loop was just too obvious. Like games have always had gameplay loops. That's not like a novel concept, but it's more that like as the loop gets more and more foregrounded and point to sort of quickly sell a game to say like, there's more games than ever, so it's hard to make stuff stand out. So things need to be legible really quickly. So if you have something that's really legible, you can kind of say like, okay, oh, I'm doing this thing. Because also like the description of Dave the Diver is total bullshit for what's actually in the game. it's like, oh, you run a shop and do your diving stuff. But if you go like look at part 25 of a playthrough and you're literally at like you're in Atlantis, like talking to the king about like the history. It's like there's a whole other game here.
Yeah.
But they have to kind of appear to not have that because again they're trying to like.
There, it should also be noted that there's like 30 mini games within the central loop. So like they're trying to break down the monotony of like fish cook, and with a bunch of other things, quest systems, farming systems, and they have little settings and areas for each of those things, which is interesting. But again, you always know that it's like, okay, they're just adding something to the loop.
Wheels within wheels, bro.
Which maybe leads us to, if you're down to transition here, to Halls of Torment.
Oh, we'll talk about Halls of Torment for sure.
Halls of Torment.
Talking about Day. I talk about Halls of Torment.
Yeah.
So Halls of Torment is the latest in. I mean, by today, who knows? There could have been another one. It's the latest in the Vampire Survivor, but genre. So I would say this one is Vampire Survivors, but it looks like Diablo 1. And you have, I think the biggest difference is that it's a 2 analog stick game versus a 1 analog stick game. And enemies have kind of like attack cones. I don't know if there's actually a word for those things. Like
AoE area. Like AoE signifiers or AoE there is a name for them, like damage indicators or something like that.
Yeah. So that's kind of the pitch at a high level. And I mean, everyone knew this. It's sort of like Vampire Survivors had to walk so everyone else could run. Vampire Survivors felt like a draft of an idea. They were able to take very far, but it's also not taken long at all for people to effectively like improve upon the formula in kind of meaningful ways. And this is kind of the next in line of that. And it's good. It's hard to talk about these things, right? Because it's like, yes, the Vampire Survivors formula still works. It's compelling. There's a loop. It's like all gameplay, and there's sort of little downtime.
It's like a game that doesn't want you to say much about it. Like, it doesn't want there to be much to say about it,
It feels like this is where video games like kind of started.
Yeah.
Like it feels a little bit like the game. Where this could totally have come out on like this could be someone's ActRaiser or something from 30 years ago where they're like, oh man, if they just Halls of Torment, that was such a good game. We should have done something with that, like it's got that kind of vibe. And it's so weird because like there's so nothing exceptional about this game. Like I'm not playing it being like, oh man, this is really pushing it over the line. It's still in that like zone of like full compulsion. It's like, yeah, it works.
Yeah.
I guess one thing it has, I think like Soulstone Survivors had this. Bone Razor Minions obviously had this. It has like persistent upgrades, so you're kind of upgrading stuff in the background through both like passive abilities, but also you can like wear armor and stuff.
They have a cool system of that, which is that you meet this guy who, if you collect a piece of armor and then you take it to the well, you can send the piece of armor up to the surface and then start your next run with it. And so there's this kind of like collection aspect where you're like sacrificing something during your run by giving your piece of armor to the well, and then that becomes a persistent upgrade, which I think is kind of like a little twist on the formula. It gives you it gives you like something to do during your run. There are a few of those kinds of like quests and quest givers within the world itself, which is just like a neat little twist on it. And like, to me, I think this one works better than like a Vampire Survivors, I personally
Yeah.
think I like it better than Brotato, but
Oh yeah, I haven't played Brotato.
Brotato is like cool. It's
Yeah.
very cartoony. It feels like a Flash game. Like all these feel like Flash games. Which,
Yeah.
you know what? I've like really wished for games that were like Flash games, because I miss those.
It's really cool. Like, as much as we like to shit on Vampire Survivors and the fact that won a fucking BAFTA, like, it's what's sort of cool about something like this is that like it reminds me a lot of what happened when battle royales kind of hit, where like it's a smart move to move where the sort of the money is at, and you're getting like active game design experimentation,
Yeah.
which is what we always talk about, kind of sort of wanting. And you're getting a lot of people who are just sort of trying things, and like some of them are good, some of them don't move the needle forward, but they are like fun ways to experiment with something. And the fact that this sort of core idea of Vampire Survivors is like both really easy to understand, but also like from a programming perspective, speaking as a programmer, is like very easy to implement. It means that you can sort of get this rapid experimentation that is not possible. I mean, like even like something like a battle royale, right? Like that's a lot of, you're like doing net code and like doing large levels, like that shit's real hard. But like being able to develop effectively a tower defense is like a really easy starting point, where you could like make a Vampire Survivors like as your first like tutorial video game. And so what it means is that we're getting a lot of rapid experimentation of people just putting out new games that are like this, that are just trying different things. And the other sort of crazy part to me is that the genre has proved like surprisingly resilient. Like obviously no one's like meeting Vampire Survivors highs, but like people are buying all the new ones. Like people are buying Brotato, people are buying Halls of Torment, people are buying Bone Razor. Like people are buying this stuff. There's like clearly a demand here for that, which I think is also just like, I don't know, that is exciting as someone who cares about, you know, the culture and sort of progress of games and game design. It's like, oh, people aren't just like there's enough interest in this sort of new thing that sustains the kind of cottage industry of games like it, which I think is cool, you know. And so it is fun to play something like this that feels a little different and plays a little different, and it like it's not going to change the world.
And it comes in at a different price point too. This game's like $4.
Oh yeah,
You know,
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's a big
good
thing.
luck.
Also, Vampire Survivors was like $2. So there's like a lot of space there for experimentation, and a lot of people, you know, it's not a huge investment to play this game, and you'd like, you know, you're gonna get, you know, a couple hours of enjoyment out of it, which is just, who's gonna say no to that?
Yeah.
Granted, there's like only so much you can kind of say about these, and it seems like it's
Is there
almost
any like
intentional.
crazy late game stuff? Like I don't even. Does it go weird places?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't go like any places that are like super
It
unexpected.
goes nowhere.
I mean, it's just like you get an end boss. There's a few more like systems that they introduce. There's like a potion system and alchemy type stuff, but nothing crazy. They introduced some new weapons and stuff, but there's no like, nothing is defying your expectations of what you think is going to happen in the game, which is fine.
Yeah, I'm like
which is
looking at like late game footage now, and it's
it's what you would
basically like
expect.
this.
Yeah. There's like a final boss. Like there's final bosses of each level, which is cool. Like that's dope.
Okay, actually, I just see something insane. Excuse me. There's just like, it looks like someone's got a firecracker going off in the middle of the level. You should pull this up on stream. I'll like DM it to you real fast. And jump to like 12 minutes in. One thing I don't like about this game, they'll say while Josh is pulling that up, is that the upgrades fucking suck.
What was the
you
time?
get like
What timestamp?
about like 12 minutes. I mean, you could also just go later in the video.
Yeah.
It, like there are meaningful I mean meaningful is a weird word, but like there are upgrades. You level up and you get an upgrade, right? Like, and some upgrades are like, I don't know what you would call these, but I would call them like meaningful, where it's like, oh, I have 2 spinning blades, now I get 3 spinning blades, or like lightning now strikes in 5 different places instead of 2 different places, or like stuff like that. And you get those sort of like, I don't know, every like 5 levels or something. I think I don't know what the actual number is, but you level up a lot in between that, and all those upgrades are just like +2 block strength, +6 movement speed, +10% attack speed, and it's just like, I don't know, it's just boring because this is sort of a complaint that we have with Loop Hero, where it's like, okay, we're doing loops and we're sort of making a lot of decisions all the time, so either make the decisions I'm making sort of meaningful, or just like choose that shit for me or something, versus making me have to choose between like 4% versus 4.2 and 1% somewhere else. Like, that's just not a fun thing to do. And this game has like a lot of that in between stuff.
I will say though, in its defense, I think a lot of that stuff just does end up becoming lip service basically, or just like a mechanic that's just there to exist. But there's something about the implementation of it in this game that is specifically gives you something more to think about based on the class that you're playing. So
sure.
Yeah, like I really enjoy that it's like if you're playing as the archer, like they have these, it's like a bow and arrow, and so like you want to focus more on crit or attack speed. So like it's I know it sounds simple, but it gives me something to think about, and like it's not something where I have to go on the internet and be like, what's the best build for the archer? Like you can do that, but I think that it gives you space to like choose what kind of build you're going to go with in a specific game, and like they work in different ways, and it's kind of interesting. I know that the stats themselves feel simplistic, but you actually see them like bear out the moment that you pick them up, and it brings it back to basics in a way that like immediately makes a difference in the way that you're playing the game, which I really like.
I just keep wishing like more game like this, maybe I should do this, but like more games like this that are obviously so low budget and have such a low bar for art stuff. Like you could just do stuff like what Hades does, which is that there's like combinatoric aspects to things where it's like, now my blades have lightning, and then I'm also doing rain, so now my lightning blades will actually electrocute the puddles of water that I put down. Like that's the type of stuff I wish these games had more of, whereas instead it feels like you're just kind of like pushing bars up, and even like the adding more blades thing is whatever, but like this, per the description of the YouTube video we're watching, it says this is the most insane weapon and build in Halls of Torment. But like what's actually happening on screen is that it's the same skill, or that it's the same 3 skills that are each sort of buffed,
just min-max,
but they have no interaction with each other. So it's just like, okay, I'm just doing more of the same. It's like, I wish there was more sort of that like kind of productive interaction in a roguelike style, where you could actually sort of do builds, so to speak.
That's a $15 game, Kyle. You're talking about a $15
game. $7 game. Yeah. But yeah, so I don't know. Play Halls of Torment. It's $4.
Okay. Do you want to talk about Exoprimal, or do you want to start getting to questions? Because we have a lot of questions.
Talk about Diablo 4.
Okay.
About questions.
Okay.
Okay. So Josh, let me tell you something.
What's up?
Gamers are mad again, man.
Uh-oh.
Today's Gamers Are Mad part of the podcast. And I'm interested. I was not totally meaning to do this, but I realized sort of starting with Hearthstone is actually a good preamble to this discussion. So there's a new Diablo patch that got announced, and part of this patch is that it sort of slows down a lot of abilities, as well as nerfing builds, or nerfing specific affixes to weapons, namely crit and vulnerable, that were kind of overrepresented in builds, so to speak. You got any idea how the gamers reacted?
Mad?
You want to write a Reddit post for me real fast? Give me your best off the cuff 4-sentence post on Reddit for how you feel about this.
You do it. You do it.
You want me to do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just read one. Instead of adding complex and challenging aspiring content for players to strive for, increasing rewards and incentives to do such content over just regular ARPG like farming, they nerfed player power by 50% across the board. I suppose adding gold and magic fine percent modifiers to each tier of Nightmare Dungeon wasn't too hard as well. Rerolling items of the occultist is too expensive? Tough shit. You now have like 3 completely useless affixes for 4 or 5 classes to help you break your items even faster. Overworld is boring and meaningless past level 5. Gotcha. Let's make Helltide chests expensive as fuck for no reason while maintaining the same terrible rewards.
Sounds par for the course.
If you are truly unhappy with the state of the game, do as I and other players plan to do. Do not log on 20th or after. Not on Eternal either. If you log in, you prove them right. If you log in, your complaints mean nothing, and you may as well apologize and ask for forgiveness by buying the battle pass. The only thing Blizz cares about is money. The only metric that matters is, did people log in and play? Cool, then we can make them spend more money in their rage. It's just a bluff. So don't do it. Don't log in. Don't play. Let Season 1 numbers be massively less than release. Let the White Knight fanboys bait you and say, quote, great, better servers for us, end quote. Cool. Hope they have fun eating Rod's colonoscopy aftermath. I had reservations about even buying this game, but the release was okay and the game was good enough, though lacking a lot of QOL, among other things. Seeing Season 1 be a giant fuck you of Nurse with 0 QOL improvements and no addressing the massive core issues in a $70 AAA game, misspelled as GAM, I won't show them. I'll take it in the ass and play this pathetic and frankly insulting state of the game. If you are really upset, prove it. Don't log in. If you do, you just reinforce their awful process. Downvote me all you want. I want D4 to be good, and they just seem determined to make awful choices for some reason. A decent number of people seem comfortable being served a shit sandwich when we ordered a steak dinner. No thanks.
Wow. I mean, it's. I don't think it's. No, I think we get the idea.
I think there's just so like. I feel for Blizzard, in part because, not because like I'm a game developer or whatever, but they're sort of in a corner, which I feel like is that you have 1% of players like on subreddits yelling about changes that they probably wouldn't notice if the patch notes weren't even posted. And like they posted this stuff and the subreddit has like exploded. People are like so mad. But it's also one of these things where I don't know if we can talk about like the semiotics of patch notes or something, but when you read patch notes, right, like as a gamer, you like go down and you sort of read them independently. And so when you see like nerfs after nerfs or whatever, you don't necessarily see like the whole picture of what's happening. So like Blizzard wants to make a good game. Like that's a thing they want to do. They want to have people have a positive experience in the game. But like you can't balance a game for every single person who plays it. So like this game came out a month and a half ago and people are like getting mad about late end game shit. And like a lot of people that I know that are playing the game, minus the fucking gamers on the bad end Discord, are like still working through the campaign and like haven't even touched in-game content yet and probably may never touch in-game content. They'll like play the fucking 30-40 hour campaign and like put the game down maybe. But like it's one of these things where it's like hard to think about patch notes as a concept because it's you sort of assume you're under like the person who writes the stuff on the subreddit assumes that like they know what Diablo 4 is better than Blizzard, like you know that they're just the ones that really know what should be fixed. And even if they have stuff that like should be fixed, you know, there's a limited amount of time to work on stuff and like people have working on Diablo as a job and people have like families and shit. So you only have some number of hours to work on the game and then it's like what are we doing, you know? So it was an interesting thing to sort of see happen where it's just a cycle that is played out for fucking ever. It's just people like post stuff like game changes, and then just gamers fucking explode. If the number does not go up and number go down, gamer get mad. It's kind of the end result here, because like I don't think anybody would fucking notice or care.
Well, it's interesting because it makes me think of the like
about Hearthstone, Josh.
The Riot stuff with like the whole Garen curve of like how like beginners are really good with Garen, but like he falls off later because like he like at higher levels because his kit's not as powerful, blah blah blah, blah. Like you know how to use him better, whatever. There's like accepted ways to play the game that exist online within the hardcore circles that like the average person playing Diablo just simply doesn't know about, right? Like if you pick up an item and you're like, oh, this is like 30% frost resistance, blah, blah, blah. And then, you know, naturally you're thinking like the next thing you want, like the next item you pick up, oh, it has 30% frost resistance. So it's like, oh, I already have a lot of frost resistance. I want poison resistance. Or like, you know, a certain item has plus 10% physical damage, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, that's pretty good. Oh, I want 10% magic damage or whatever other stat there is. And then you go online and they're like, none of those stats matters. All you want is crit, vulnerability.
All those items suck.
Yeah. Like, and it's like, for those people who built their builds with that information, which, that is the meta and that is like the optimal way to build your character. Of course, they're going to be pissed off when those stats get nerfed. But like for the average person playing the game for whom these mechanics have just gotten a lot more intuitive, the stats that they're actually building actually matter now. It has a different impact on them, right? And at the end of the day, if those people are benefiting, you know, if millions of those people are benefiting and like a few thousand of the others are benefiting, like, is it really a bad change at the end of the day? So it's like they're making these decisions. Like, why else would you nerf something in a single player game, right? Or in a PvE game? Like, maybe you want to give the player, like, inflate the content a bit, but at the same time, like, your intention is probably to improve the experience for some like segment of players, and probably not an insignificant one. So it's like, it sucks because
also
like
weird too, right? Because like people who play these games and who get really powerful and melt stuff will be the first people to say that the game is boring at that point. They'll be like, oh, I just press these two buttons, everything dies. Like, it's so boring. Or whatever. You know, and no one will admit that like getting there it's such this weird like monkey's paw thing, because you sort of want to get there and that's like where you're trying to go, but at the same time when you get there it makes the game really boring,
right?
Which is like a weird thing. And so like, how do you kind of reckon with that, which is like it's been like a genre thing forever. And I think that what they're, you know, part of what they're trying to do is saying like, no, like, we're gonna make I don't even know if I could comparatively say how this patch notes differ from the previous build or whatever, but it's like it might make the game a little slower and stuff's like a little bit harder.
Right.
Okay. You know, your experience, like someone was like kind of venting about an item on the subreddit where they're posting its before and after stats, and an item had a lot of crit and vulnerability, and the percentages dropped like 15% or something. And everyone was like, you know, upvoting this person, like a circle jerk or whatever. But it's like, dude, you're not going to you're just not going to notice that. Like, you're just really not going to see like, oh man, like I can really feel that 15% difference in my like gameplay of my build, where I'm already working with numbers in like the thousands and I'm already overkilling stuff anyways. Like, it's not like you're going to really get into a place where that is like going to break your game or whatever. But yeah, it's like you just get a lot of like baby's first bad patch notes with all these big games, which is, it's just funny. It just keeps happening.
Yup. I mean, at the end of the day, if you're listening to this podcast, a lot of these changes probably don't affect you, or if they do, they might actually make things.
In fact, probably most people who play the game.
Yeah. But anyways, carry on.
Oh, that was fun. Diablo 4, it's still fun. I'm still playing it. I'm still kind of working through it. It's fun to play.
Yeah, it's like really easy to pick up and just like do a couple dungeons. They really streamline it like later in the game, where when you're doing nightmare dungeons and stuff, you just like fire up your sigil and then you can auto teleport to the dungeon and just do it. And it's like scaled up. So it's just like a little, get some dungeons in, you know? Get some gear, chill.
Yeah, man. Slay some demons.
Slay some demons.
You want to do questions?
Yeah, let's do a couple questions.
Someone actually just asked, so we'll follow this up real fast. They asked, do live service models inherently create this antagonistic relation between developer and player? Maybe not the generic player, but the game's quote community. Yes. I think especially at scale. Like, I think part of the reason that people say like Path of Exile is like such a big big thing for like ARPG people is that I think Josh is talking actually. Sorry.
No, I'm not.
Oh, sorry. I thought I saw your mouth moving. I think something interesting with something like Path of Exile is that I think that game has effectively like filtered out everybody except like the sweats and no lifers, so that there's a effectively like ideological uniformity between who the developers are making the game for and like who's left. But that also means that their potential audience is like really small compared to like Diablo is trying to target like normies and like wants to appeal to normies is to be that game for them. And so like doing a live service game at that scale, I think is really hard. And I think you will sort of implicitly not necessarily develop an antagonistic relationship with the developer, but that there will be infighting about like what the thing should be. If there's a presumption that it will be updated, people are going to want different things from those updates. I think a lot about like the chart that was put out for win rate percentages for Super Smash Brothers Melee over time, which is like so interesting to me to think about and like just kind of, I don't know, muse on, which is that fact that I think like current logic would maybe not admit, but potentially say that should a game never get patched, its meta will become stale. And this is something we talk about all the time on Bad End. So what you would think is that with that same logic, a game like Super Smash Brothers Melee that is an offline game, never got patches, whatever, that there would be the best heroes or the best, I don't know what you call them. Are they even called something in Smash? Smashers?
Characters?
Smash Bros. Character?
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess, yeah. You would assume that like, okay, the best Smash Bros. Character is the best Smash Bros. Character. But like what happens is when you let a game just sit, the meta changes. So like in the Smash Bros. Melee like win rate chart, the heroes are like, or like the characters are all over the place. Like they're moving up and down the win rates all the time, because like there's no expectation of change. So people are sort of forced to find new ways inside the same systems. And I think that does mean that things could potentially get stale. Like, I don't know if an ARPG like Diablo would not get stale because of just the way, like, it's so much more about numbers, whereas Smash Bros. Is much more about execution and, like, kind of movement. I don't know. But I think there is something sort of intrinsic in this notion that, like, if you're expecting updates from someone and you're appealing to a large audience, like, there's going to be friction. So a lot of what you do, I think, is just damage control.
I also think there's just something massive built into the gap between providing a good versus providing a service. Like the expectations for each thing are like drastically different. Like if I'm giving you a $60 game, then like that's what like Diablo 2 was a good. Diablo 4 is a service. Even though like Diablo 4 is still a $60 game, like because it is seen as a service, the expectations for that are drastically different, and the expectations are different even if people like kind of envision them as being the same, right? Because like that's the whole thing. Like people are talking about how bad these patch notes are and how bad this patch is, But you know, if we were talking about Diablo 2, it'd be like a completely different thing, because it's just like it's a $60 game, and like this, they're giving you new content to mess around with. But because like some of the mechanics have been altered, people are upset about it. So I mean, I think there's a lot of things that change when you make when you go from providing a good to providing a service. But that's like just an expectations of what games are nowadays. Like you need more ways to keep the game going and to keep people playing it, and to maybe sell some cosmetics. And I don't think that's like, I don't know how bad of a thing that is. But there's definitely going to be some people who like, for whom their expectations are not going to be met. But I think that's just like the trade-off. So
yeah, it's like, do you want a game that never gets updated, or do you want a game that gets updated periodically? Or, you know, that's a sort of an individual decision.
Right.
I think the other hard part too, right, is that like, I think that all gamers would probably say games as a service as a thing fucking sucks. But also most gamers would also say that like they want updates for games that they like to play.
Right.
So it's like I'm going to launch Cantata, and if it goes well, which hopefully it will, like people are going to want content updates for it. I'm not saying Cantata is like a game as a service, but there's a way to articulate the concept of like perpetually working on content updates for a game that's successful as like games as a service. Or like friend of the show / part of Superculture, Gareth, they released Citizen Sleeper and then has pushed out like 4 content updates for it over the course of 6 months or something. A year.
Right.
Is Citizen Sleeper a game as a service? No, if we're acting in good faith, but like there's a way to articulate that strategy as a games as a service thing.
Yeah.
So it's weird.
You know it when you see it.
Other questions? We'll work backwards. This one's sort of maybe relevant. There was a Twitter thread recently that went viral, as much as a tweet can go viral these days, asking people what controversial game design opinion they had. Josh, do you have a controversial game design opinion?
I'll need time to think about this. Most of my opinions are not that controversial, man. And if they are, I feel like I've already mentioned them on this podcast.
Well, this is for the record. If you were to reply to this tweet.
Nothing's coming to mind right now.
I think my most controversial opinion is that games are really bad at telling stories. I don't know if it's controversial. I think maybe my controversial game design opinion is that flat, like 2D side scrolling like fighting and action games that work on multiple planes all fucking suck. There's just no good way to do that. Like Streets of Rage style, or like Castle Crashers, that sort of like 2D side scrolling with depth.
Yeah.
I think that fucking sucks. It has never felt good.
The brawler.
It looks cool, but it feels like shit to play because it's always so impossible to tell where you're at.
I
think it's bad.
I think I kind of agree with that. Yeah. For as much as I love like Ninja Turtles and games that fall within that category, it always actually feels like this would just be better as something else, dude. Like just make this a different type of game.
Yeah, like moving like back in diagonal just feels weird. Like your brain like just doesn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
Like in sort of trying to understand where someone's at.
Yeah.
Not for me.
Yeah.
Not for me.
There's like crafting sucks. That's like a relatively controversial one, I guess. But it's like all these opinions, it's like it's caveats. Like it's not universal. Like in some cases, it's, you know.
Are you trying to have a balanced opinion in a Twitter reply thread? Too bad. This is Elon's world now.
Not anymore. Yeah. Next question.
What does it take for y'all to want to dig into a game's lore And do you ever find yourself invested in a game that way before even playing it?
Not a big lore guy. Maybe that's my controversial game design opinion. But it's like, all that being said, I am not the kind of person to get super into lore, but I'm the kind of person to get super into thematics and how that ties in with the gameplay and design of a game. Like, that does a lot more for me than any lore stuff, typically. I'm not one to like sit there and read all the articles that are like left on the ground in a game. But you know what? I've been trying to like interact with that stuff a little bit more recently. Kind of give myself a little bit more juice to enrich the combat.
The background of the Halls of Torment lore.
The Halls of Torment, like when you pick something up and read it or something, it's got this like really crappy voice acting. It's like,
yeah,
hello, traveler, you've made it to the Halls of Torment. You know, like it's like really old school.
We have Diablo at home.
Yeah,
vibe.
It's definitely going for that, but
yeah.
I've been trying to do more of that, like where I'll read the notes and like actually pay attention to what's happening in side quests and stuff like that. And some of them have some good stuff going on, but I feel like a lot of that stuff is about presentation. You know, a lot of lore is about presentation, like audio logs. Remember how long audio logs existed where you couldn't have them playing in the background?
Yeah, you should just sit there.
You just sit there and just like listen to it, and like if you left the menu it would like stop playing. I was like, this is not what? Or like I have to like sit down and read 5 pages.
Your lore diet.
I'm like in the enemy base and you want me to sit down and read a 10-page article. Like, that's breaking my immersion, man. Just like shove it in there somewhere else, dude. I think maybe that's the thing, is that like I feel like a lot of lore just isn't implemented well still. They haven't found a way to do it that is like seamless with the gameplay. I think like in Disco Elysium it works because like that whole game is just reading anyway. So like when you're reading a little bit more, that's to be expected. But a lot of games still haven't figured out like environmental storytelling is like a total meme.
Skeleton in a toilet.
Spray paint, you know, let me out written in blood on the walls.
I feel like I'm such a bad not participant. I don't know. I'm very annoying in this regard because I just said that like games and stories suck, which I think is still true, but like the lore is like what ends up keeping me in a game. Like looking at something like Dave the Diver, I'm like, this game is not going to say anything interesting. I'm going to have like a sort of fun, really like game loopy feel buzz in the back of my head when I play this game, but like it's not going to give me something interesting that I can like latch onto. But like I think that's lore is what elevates something like Dark Souls in that regard, or like Bloodborne, or like they could just be really fun combat games, but like the idea that the story and the sort of lore of the world is intertwined with just like every element of those games makes them feel like so much more than kind of the sum of their parts.
And I mean, to be fair, Dark Souls is like the best lore possible. Like it's like the pinnacle of lore in games. And I think like a big part of it is that they don't write like 30-page articles about every single thing in there. It's just like an item description that's like, this rumor has it this once belonged to something like, you know, the Dark Warrior of the underworld. You know, like
really funny. Do you remember like the discussion around the Dark Souls items, like when it first started? Because it was like these items have these like just mysterious descriptions that allude to like blah 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 or whatever, and like I think where we're at now better represents that statement, because if you go back and read like Dark Souls items, they're literally like, the king who wore this slayed this dragon. Like it's like so plain. Where it's kind of staggering. You're like, this used to feel way more mysterious, and now it's like, oh no, it's just the stories and the item descriptions, which now like just everyone sort of does. But it's really funny to like, because now like it's way more, even in like Elden Ring or something, it's like much more sort of things aren't as explicit, I guess I would say. Whereas in Dark Souls 1, it's like pretty on the nose.
Souls does
that, like,
you think what? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I just think that lore is like, it's one of those things that like if it's done well, it can like be the thing that makes the game, but it's so easy just to do really poorly. This was actually like for Cantata, Roy, the writer, was like very anti-lore and just didn't want to write any lore, maybe both for like time commitment, but also just like we don't need it. He's like, just we're doing the story, like that's the thing, and like all the stuff and the ways things look and the ways people look is sort of like lore like that, versus having, you know, some book that says that this tank was blah, 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 blah. And we might still add some of that stuff, but really initially he was like, we don't. He's like, lore is one way to do narrative, and I think it maps well to like network infrastructure like the internet, because if stuff is opaque, you can like find stuff. It feels like you're kind of digging and exploring. But we sort of actively chose not to do lore in Cantata, for better or for worse.
I like that, because like the idea of there being some like underlying truth behind an explanation behind every single thing that's happening is like not. I'm not really into that, and I think Souls is great because like it's like a horror movie that like never shows you the monster. Like Souls never shows you exactly what's going on. There's like always more subtext underneath it. And there's probably at the end of the day, like there's no full explanation for like everything that's going on, which is good. It's like, do you want everything to be a picture book where it's like this happened and this happened and then the king killed the dragon and the dragon became decayed and lives underground and now you went and killed it, and it's like everything is explained, but like it's so much more fun when you're just like, what is this thing? And then you read something and it's like, this thing could be this. Like, wow. That's wild to think about, that this maybe came from here. But like you don't really know at the end of the day. It's just like endlessly more interesting. And that's like what lore is for me, and that I feel like games should tap into more. I
think it's just such like a risk, right? It's like easier writing all your own lore allows like the company to control the narrative and blah blah blah. It's
something that we see a lot. I've seen a lot in K-pop too, where it's like they want to make every video like, oh, the lore, like this person was killed in a car crash 3 music videos ago, and now there's like this deep lore. Yeah. And
oh my God.
I saw this thing today about One Piece. It was like a reel of like just some of the jokes from One Piece, and one of them is like, oh, Luffy, like, aren't you cold? It's minus 10 degrees out here. And then he like looks over at them, and then he's like, oh my God, he realizes it's cold because they like brought it up, and he's like, it's so cold. And it's just like a funny slapstick joke moment, which like One Piece is full of these just like little bits and funny jokes. And then like in the comments, it was like, oh, I like the theory that like Luffy gets cold later because he's made out of rubber. Like his he's a rubber man. He's made of rubber. Yeah. And like, they're like, oh, I like that the idea that he gets cold because he's made of rubber and he doesn't notice till later. It's like, that makes the joke less funny. It's just a funny joke. Like there doesn't have to be an explanation for it. Like in fact, like that's the opposite of what makes good comedy, is like explaining the joke. That's like the first thing that you learn. It's like if you have to explain your joke afterwards, it's not as good. Like just let it be funny, let it be mysterious, let it be good.
It's Tumblr, man. Tumblr and Vox.
I know. And to be fair, like when I was younger, the idea of there being some easy explanation for everything that happens, I would have loved that.
Totally.
Oh, yeah. What the heck happens at the end of this movie? End of this movie, explained. Oh, yes, like, please click. Give that to me on a platter. Yeah, but it's like, it's endlessly less interesting than just like, this thing made me feel crazy because I had no clue what was happening and I had to develop my own theory in my head. That's how I feel about lore. And that's why I agree with Roy's approach in Cantata.
Last question. Well, I guess before the last question, which is
I gotta head out pretty soon. Last
one. Have you ever
one.
got invested in a game's lore before you played it?
No, probably not. I don't think so.
I read a lot of early WoW lore, like when WoW was like first coming out, like a lot of the Blizzard stuff. I feel like I definitely remember reading like OG Blizzard lore about like the Warcraft universe and StarCraft. Actually, I like read StarCraft lore more than I played StarCraft 1.
I think a lot of people these days kind of err toward the opposite side of that, of like wanting to know the least amount about the lore so that it can like be a surprise to them or whatever.
Properly absorb it in the intended fashion.
Yeah.
Last question. I'm trying to think how to phrase this so it doesn't become a 1-hour discussion. I posted an article in the Discord, which you should join, patreon.com/badend. It's for all the best discussion of video games you could ever want. I posted an article by Rob Horning that was about user input tracking on like Facebook. And someone asked, related to that, how do you think companies are using information from tracking input from people playing games? Do you think this information is mostly used for marketing purposes, or can you imagine other uses for tracking gamer input? So I know for a fact that people track the shit out of everything. And there's not necessarily like much use in selling that data because it's so specific. A lot of it's like if we're thinking about Diablo 4, like Blizzard definitely has a heat map somewhere internally that shows them where players die the most. And so it's up to them to figure out like where, if they're trying to make that more or less or whatever. It's the same thing with like League of Legends, like Valve, or with Dota and Riot with League, like all like and indie games. Like a lot of people, there's third party sort of tracking stuff that tracks like not necessarily raw input, but like just general activities in the game. Like for Cantata, we do some of this stuff where it's basically just seeing. I guess we'd sort of do it through achievements, but like see when people finish chapters. So like if people finish what's like the highest level chapter most people finish or something. Most of it goes back to like feedback for like design and whatever. But also I've seen a lot of really interesting GDC talks about like doing performance monitoring where like people are basically doing monitoring of performance on machines. And so if a lot of players seem to encounter a slowdown in this specific area of the map, it means that like the geometry is too dense or blah, blah, blah. So it's a lot of like balancing and tweaking of a game. So like, I mean, it happens. It's been happening for decades.
Data is king, baby.
Like, yeah, data's king. I don't know, like to the degree that like the article, the thing that was sort of notable about the article I posted was that Facebook would track things that you put in the I don't know what it's called, like the box where you say what's on your mind or whatever.
The post field.
Who's got plans January 6th? But Facebook is actually tracking what you didn't actually post. So if you wrote something in that box, Facebook would know what you wrote that. And so they were doing sort of engineering activities around trying to basically like they assumed that anything that you didn't post or chose not to post was a loss for them. So they wanted to try to incentivize posting as much as possible to reduce the amount of stuff that you could have said but didn't. I don't know you could sort of do the same thing with games and kind of to the same ends. But like you can get a lot of games are really interesting compared to something like social media because like you can like open like Facebook or Twitter and scroll to like look at stuff and maybe like not even move your mouse, just sort of scroll. And that's sort of like a, I don't know, signal poor activity. Like you're not interacting with things necessarily enough to like derive a ton of value from it. But like games are like a huge string of like constant input.
Yeah.
They generate like a ton of data. Like you log into Diablo and Blizzard is totally tracking. Like a really good example of this is in Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom, Heroes Path mode is effectively what Nintendo was tracking already for metrics and QA data that they very likely just turned into a gameplay feature.
Yeah.
They're saying that like they're literally tracking where you were in the whole game at every single point. And like they were 100% using that data for like QA and stuff when the game was being developed to make sure that people were like visiting all parts of the map or whatever. And
It
so,
feels
like,
very dev tool debug.
It's totally dev.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, and so I mean it's cool to see it too. Or it's the same thing with like
Ascend was one of those.
you played Ascend.
No. The ability in Tears of the Kingdom where you go up through the floor.
Oh. Yeah. Wait, what is the thing?
Like the thing where you go up through the floor and then you
Yeah.
go through. That was like a tool that they used in like Breath of the Wild to navigate
like,
better.
You're like I want to get to the top of the mountain. Like okay, just
It's like, oh, what if I could just do that in the game? And then
Yeah.
they put it in the game.
But yeah, so companies 100% track like everything you do inside of a video game. They don't like sell it to Cambridge Analytica. I mean, they might, but like, I don't know what use Cambridge Analytica would necessarily have from like your Diablo 4 play history versus like what products you liked on Instagram. You know, there's value, there's sort of extrinsic value to that data.
Yeah, chat logs would be probably like the only thing that could possibly be like incriminating.
This person keeps saying LFG over and over and over. I think they're looking for Groupons.
Who keeps
So-
saying LFG?
You want to wrap it up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for listening. We're Bad End Podcast. Appreciate you joining us. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll address them in the next episode. But in the meantime, you can find us on social media, Twitter. Our handle there is Bad End Podcast. Gmail.com. Our Gmail is @badendpod. You can rate us and review us on iTunes. Check us out on Patreon if you want to be part of the Bad End community. Some of the coolest people around. I'll be hanging out with some of them tonight.
Nice.
Yeah. But yeah, we'll talk to you soon. We're part of Superculture. Go check out Bullet Points Monthly, Heterotopia's Funland, Superculture Review, all great little projects. And we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Later.
Bye.